Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. As Netflix's new hit show, Baby Reindeer, takes the world by storm, we welcome one of the directors from the show, Weronika Tofilska. Weronika will talk us through what it was like directing episodes 1 through 4 of the show. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Weronika. Hi, Weronika. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very happy that we can sit down and discuss one of the latest projects that has been released, Baby Reindeer, which has taken the world by storm, which feels like it a little bit. I know we were talking a little bit about it off air previously, but the reaction to it must be absolutely crazy from your side, knowing that you've worked on it and then just seeing how everybody's connecting to it or the comments and praise that's coming on. How have you found the reaction to the whole show?
I mean, it's pretty amazing and a little bit overwhelming. But I think, because we have been working on this for over a year, and Richard and the execs at Clerkenwell, they have been working on it even longer than me, obviously. So it really does feel at some point when you're editing for a very long time that it's really like a private thing that just between like a handful of people, we're kind of watching it. And you kind of keep forgetting that actually it's going to get released into the world and people are going to see it. So when it happens and people watch it and people were nice about it and people like it, that's already great. But when it becomes this huge thing and so many people are watching it, that I literally am getting messages from childhood friends from like back from Poland and ex-boyfriends and like just everyone, my parent friends, my boyfriend's parent friends, and it's becoming like a completely different thing. I think that for those who work in TV and TV directors especially, I think a lot of the times we do things, we make shows and they have their fan bases, but it doesn't really translate into like the sort of public space and public discourse in that way. So it feels unusual and feels great.
I guess you know something you've made it is when you have your parents' friends messaging you, because we come back from like the same background of having I've got Polish heritage, is that it's all like one big network. So once one person speaks and finds out about it, it spreads like quicker than wildfire. So I think you've kind of feel like you've made it a little bit when you have your parents' friends being like, we watched it and we enjoyed it, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe everybody else coming out the woodwork
finally
as well.
they I think there's a sort of acknowledgement, oh, she does have a job. But it's funny. I think that's specifically, I think, what Netflix brings, is that when you do shows for BBC, they might be kind of bored, and in a year's time, if they're like a big success, they might come to different countries. Whereas for Netflix, it's like an instant release in all around the world. And when a show becomes like number one in UK and then number one in US, it then kind of becomes number one in Italy, and it sort of takes off that way, and I think that's quite unusual.
I think as well, like having it as you mentioning it, like if it was here in the UK and just on BBC, then as you said, within a year it might go on to somewhere in America, then so on in other countries. But again, with like I guess the beauty of Netflix is that it comes out all day and date everywhere. Everybody gets it. And it's kind of, as you said, like it just kind of snowballs, because if it's one country has it, then the sort of next country, and then I wonder how, when people at Netflix, when they're looking at the viewing numbers, and how something like this, where it's not really that sort of algorithmic theme show, it was more like an organic sort of created show, how they sort of look at that data and then think this has kind of gone against what we do, but it's incredible.
I mean, it's definitely the question for them. What do they make of it? I think, they did commission the show and they did really stick with it and they really believe in it. And you know, I think that's great. I think they were right to do so, clearly. There's obviously risk involved that, it doesn't have any big actors in it. It has a sort of a funny name, could be confused for a Christmas movie or something. So really, the only reason why people watched it is because of kind of word of mouth. Maybe the trailer helped. I think maybe the fact that they knew that it was a real story, a true story, and then it kind of just spread because one person recommended to the other, and so on and so on. And then when it kind of jumped to number one, I think people were like, "What is this? Why is this show on number one? What is this show?" And that's when like the rest of people came. So it's highly unusual, but obviously we're really grateful and feel really lucky.
Yeah, and again, as you said, like when people see it as number one, it's like, what's this show? And you're right that Baby Reindeer, you might think it's like a Christmas film about a reindeer trying to get its stripes and save Christmas or something. Netflix contact me. That's their next big thing. But
Love that.
yeah, that's what it could be. And I guess as well, like the amount of things that you see online about it is another sort of thing where I don't know, just the amount of people kind of you feel like you're part of as like an audience member, you feel you're part of some sort of bigger community because there's so many people jumping on it and being like, yeah, everybody should watch this, or the amount of recommendations as well.
Yeah, and I think what's the most kind of rewarding part is that people, reach out, people tweet about their sort of personal relationship with the show, whether this is something that actually happened in their lives or whether it's just something that they connect to. And to be honest, that's sort of the reasons why anyone, I think, wants to do shows like this and to see just people connecting to it on an emotional level and have some kind of experience that, can be cathartic, so that, that's the best part, really.
Yeah, but I guess with your sort of your involvement on the show, how did the project come about for you, and what made you want to take it on?
Well, so I think I had a lunch. This is a very Hollywood statement, but I had a lunch with my agent, and she basically said a couple things. There is this one thing that I think would be you're definitely gonna love. And I was like, "What is it?" And she said, "It's called Baby Reindeer, and about this is this comedian, and this is a real story." And she told me that sort of about Martha and how she calls him a baby reindeer. And just based on that there's a woman calling someone a baby reindeer, I already just knew that I'm going to like this. And then I finally got the script and I just devoured the script, just instantly thought, this is the best thing that I read in terms of TV script. I just could sort of imagine it straight away. It was written in such a vivid way, and I really felt like I could imagine visually how it should look, and I was really hoping that Richard and Clackerwell will see it in a similar way. So it really jumped out for me on the page. And then just in a very traditional way, I had a meeting with them. I talked to them about what I thought, and I pitched my ideas on it, and they liked it, and they hired me. So it was quite normal, in that sense.
Well, firstly, I hope your agent paid for lunch, not yourself.
I
Um,
think so, yeah.
but I guess when you get the scripts and that's the sort of that's like your blank canvas as a director to sort of read through it and absorb the whole story. And I guess as you're checking on it at first, you kind of probably read it for the story, and then once you are in, I bet you're kind of thinking like, I really need to get on this. what's the best way that I can pitch myself and get onto this project. Because you're saying as well how the script was so like quite vivid and all the descriptions in it. I can imagine that you probably read them all very quickly. Uh,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
again,
I think for me, in a weird way, it's sort of slightly together. So if I read a script, I imagine it as a sort of already a show. Sometimes I think if the script is not very well written, sorry to say, I struggle to imagine, and I'm kind of going, or I imagine like a really conventional version of it, and I'm struggling to find an unconventional way of doing it, or an interesting way of doing it. If I can only see like a sort of boring TV version of it, or sometimes I can't really imagine how to do it, and I'm like, I don't think this is for me because I can't really imagine it. Whereas with Baby Reindeer, I just felt like I just knew how, like I just felt like the language was the same language that I was sort of what I was seeing in my head. So really, I kind of already was imagining it a certain way. So it's not like I'm kind of reading as a sort of filmmaker and then not a filmmaker. In a way, I'm kind of already sort of already thinking. If I like something, I'm already getting excited about it, like instantly. But obviously, it's still pretty superficial at this point.
because you have so much experience with scripts and writing them as well, you know what's going to sort of leap out story wise, and then what you can play in your mind as well. I know at that sort of stage as well, you might not know who's been cast in it, so you can kind of, it's basically like sort of a blank canvas of like actors or people playing it out, but at least in your mind, you know how the scene is going to be blocked and what sort of notes you can give actors in how they're going to be portraying the emotion from the script to onto the screen. I think as well, you're right when a script's not necessarily when you're not connecting with a script, shall we say, I think then that becomes very difficult to probably read and then understand what's going on story wise because it just becomes a bit of a chore, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing when I was reading it was the fact that Martha's language was amazing and so funny, so interesting, so odd. And there were so many clues about who she is as a person and her sort of feelings and kind of hidden emotions and stuff like that. And I just thought because of the way that she was speaking really fast with a lot of kind of sort of funny phrases and obviously Scottish accent and all that. And I was just my instant worry was who would ever play this? I just already was kind of sweating and thinking about the worst version of this performance possible and how many bad versions could be. And I just knew that, out of 100 actors, 99 wouldn't be good for this part, if not more. So obviously that kind of connects a bit with the casting and how relieved we were when we found Jess Gunning, who for me was the only person that kind of got the dialogue right, and just even that, just even the rhythm, the comedy, just even that she kind of nailed. But obviously on a deeper level, she connected with that character and gave so much depth to Martha. And I was just again so lucky to find her.
I guess there's like another thing as well with casting, just how important it can be and how you can go through how many different actresses that can come into audition, but then when you have that one person that comes in and just feel like there's no one else that we can think of, need to go ahead. I think as well, like then that's I guess in your mind you also you because you read the script and you can think about how it's being portrayed. I guess once you have that person in your mind as well, knowing that actually if we get this person, this is exactly how scenes can break down and get that right balance of comedy and drama in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, what was great, obviously, is that when you do auditions, you get to do several scenes with the actors, so you get a sense of them and how they're going to do it. and the kind of relationship you're going to have with them. Yeah, obviously, it all changes, but that's the sort of benefit of having people taping as opposed to kind of offering the roles.
With something like taping, are you saying about self-taping rather than picking people specifically?
So we were doing both in this case because there was like sort of several stages. So I think we there was sort of tapes initially, and then we kind of selected based on those tapes, and then we invited to audition, to do chemistry read with Richard. So it was kind of like three auditions altogether, including the self tape. But doing it in person was really important.
Okay. Again, that's another sort of, what's the word? Another sort of world, and diving in is like the whole casting process and how people are found, and the process of sort of making shortlists for them, which is also very fascinating because you must have like a keen eye of like how people are what actors are strong at, and then what they can't do as well. But then it must be quite disheartening when you have to pick between two and you don't know who to go for. Uh,
Yeah, I think it's interesting because sometimes when you're so close to something that it actually becomes harder to know, because it when you when you read something or when you write something, you're creating a fictional character in your head that doesn't exist, and then a real person comes along, and that real person is going to be different to what's on the page, just naturally for different reasons. And then sometimes it can be a bit jarring, and then you sort of hold on to like these things that at that point are important to you, that say that your character is very tall, and then comes a short actor and and they're really good, and then the other actor just looks exactly like the character but maybe it's not as good, and then you do find yourself kind of wondering what is more important there. And I mean, obviously the more important is whether they're a good actor, but in a way these things become a bit of a dilemma. So yeah, it's funny. It's not it now. Obviously, we cast the all our cast in Baby Reindeer, and we think everyone's just perfect. But obviously, we weren't. It was very much like a process of finding everyone and selecting everyone.
yeah, and there's nothing really I can add to the whole casting process, but just because everybody is so on point with it, and which is quite scary when you're watching because it's just so you wouldn't pick out and say somebody was not good in it. So
Mm.
hats off to you and to the team, and
I
you all.
mean, obviously we had like the best casting director in UK, potentially Nina Gold. So we're very lucky to have them. And and I think we just spent a lot of time on it. Clackwell and Richard, obviously, and me. And so yeah, I'm really proud of our cast for sure.
Yeah, and I think if anybody looked up Nina Gold's CV, they would know why she was one of the best as well. Yeah, incredible. If you looked up her IMDb, yeah, amazing. What I would like to talk about as well is like the shooting process of the show, because I think there's really one big thing that kind of played on my mind when I watched the show, and that's like the use of space. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I haven't seen anyone mention it, but they mention the use of space in the show. But I'm sure there'll be an article tomorrow morning coming out and be like, "Oh, usage of space." But as a director and reading scenes on the page to then creating it for creating it in person, was the idea of space always in the script? And then how important was it in the whole pre-production process and shooting process to incorporate the theme of space and how we're going to be shooting in certain areas?
That's interesting. I think that, as I said, that the Richard is such a great writer and writes with a lot of detail. So, from memory, I think there was description to every space. It wasn't overwritten that way, but there was sort of a sense of what each of those spaces are, you know, mainly like the pub or Liz's house. And so they all kind of had a character. And then as far as I remember, I also like picked Richard's brain. I think we had like a couple meetings when I sort of like asked him, you know, it wasn't more about, oh, okay, what exactly this place was in real life, or what exactly was the color of the wall and, you know, the carpet or whatever. But I was trying to get to hit from him, what was the essence of this space? Because I knew that, you know, I'm not necessarily the most like naturalistic filmmaker. So what I really like to do is create a bit of a world. And obviously this world is very much based on Richard's memories. So it was important for me to kind of get that sort of essence of like what he remembers about this space. And then kind of create a version of that that's not going to be one-to-one from, because obviously in real life there's a lot of randomness, there's a lot of chaos, there's, you know, it's not, the real life is not usually that cinematic. So maybe you don't use that. Actually, I feel like someone's going to say, what, real life is not cinematic, real life is extremely cinematic. Yeah, obviously it can be, but what I mean is that you even in the most kind of naturalistic films and stuff, you still create spaces, you choose colors, you color coordinate, you change things, you don't just point camera at something. So in that sense, we're kind of trying to capture essence of these places. Like obviously the pub was really important to us, and we spent quite a lot of time trying to find a real pub in London. And obviously there's multitude of pubs in London, but because what we needed from it was more than perhaps most pubs can offer, which is, you know, flexibility of camera angles, camera movement, and and then lighting and all this sort of stuff. And when we realized it's basically impossible to shoot the amount of scenes that we have in the pub in a real location, because, you know, we can't really float a real bar, you know, lighting from the outside, all these sort of things. And we decided that we need to build that pub. So that pub was built, but actually was sort of based on few pubs that we saw. So we liked several pubs, and we kind of, and also the pub that Richard told us about, and the colors and the stuff that were to do with that space, original space, were sort of translated into our pub, and built by Debbie Barton, was the production designer. So obviously that was really important. Like the same with Darren's flat. We knew kind of we need to build that space, just because so much happens there, and so much, you know, again, so many camera angles that would be impossible in a location. I think what was important to us is that sense of like the space that can be two things. One, during daytime, it can almost feel like a pleasant kind of space. Like there's something cool about it. It's colors and almost like soft and kind of fuzzy. You know, it's like kind of a lot of couches and kind of materials and textures and kind of a bit fun and sort of, and then at night it just becomes this basically hellish kind of trap. And so that's why we sort of like wanted that long corridor, and we wanted specific kind of windows that you don't really see the world outside that much, and you just kind of feel a little bit like almost like a basementy kind of feel. And so that was really important to us. And then obviously we there's other locations that were mostly real locations that we found, comedy clubs and stuff. But we spent a long time on finding these locations. Tom, our location manager, was amazing, and we kind of just like drove around London looking for these great spaces. One of them was Liz's house that we found, which is a real house, which was this amazing, beautiful, like 4-story house. And yeah, so we really paid a lot of attention to it.
So there's a lot to sort of break down from your answer,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I
sure,
think I'll
sure.
start with like the pub, the fact that you guys built that. Because I was thinking when I was watching it, I was like, surely this wasn't shot in a pub,
Mhm.
like a real location pub. Because sometimes, especially in London, I always feel like sometimes certain pubs feel very cramped. And I was looking, there's certain times where it felt very sort of big open spaces, and I was like, oh, I only know a few places like that, and I don't know if that would be possible to get permission to film for so long
Yeah.
in those places. But then I guess on top of that, the idea is of how do we light the pub and not being able to, when you're there on a proper location, there's so many logistics or issues with just lighting as well. So I
Mm.
guess building it was probably was the easiest solution.
I mean, what we discovered with Krzysztof and Debbie. Krzysztof is the a cinematographer, and Debbie, and this became almost like we became quite obsessive about this whole pub thing because we literally saw 100 pubs, and we just realized that what makes it quite hard to shoot in any London pubs and maybe British pubs in general, that it's like the relationship between the bar and the windows is that very often windows are directly opposite to the bar, which basically for shooting is like someone walks and they're like backlit and the person at the bar is frontlit. Whereas in America, for example, you have a lot of those like dive bar kind of places where you have this long bar and you have a window which is like not parallel, but sorry, what's the opposite of parallel? Do you know what I mean? Like the sort of the windows are in the background where the sort of well, that's how it's in Baby Reindeer,
Yeah,
basically.
it's like the windows are sort of set in opposite way rather than the like the bartender has the windows to the back of them rather than the front of them in a normal
They,
pub.
they have the windows on their sides, basically. So they both have windows. They're both side lit from the windows. And so which is kind of more like an American type of space. And that's why there's so many like great bar scenes. But then we were actually looking with my DP Krzysztof a lot at like some maybe like references for good pub scenes. And obviously there's Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead and stuff like that. But apart from that, there was not that many actually. And comparing to like the amount of scenes in bars that you see that are great, you know. So yeah, we kind of discovered we need to we need to kind of combine this American model with the British model somehow. And we built that.
Isn't that funny as well? Like the idea of like the issues coming up with just shooting somewhere where you'd think of quite simple, like a pub, and how it should be, but then it's like the problems that you come up, how it's going to be lit and how it's people move around it and the blocking of the scenes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like another sort of mental gymnastics that you need to do to make sure that it looks correct and that the scene is lit correctly.
Yeah, and as you said, you know, the amount of space was all, of course, an issue as well, because as you say, you know, a lot of pubs are smaller. There's some bigger pubs, but then there's these issues with a lot of pillars and you know that kind of stuff. And but we also wanted in the daytime scenes to give that kind of sense of isolation and loneliness that you know the pub is a bit dead, to be honest. And Donny's kind of on his own in this bigger space, and I think he wouldn't feel as lonely in a kind of little cramped pub with low ceiling, you know.
Yeah, and having that, and then having all that area as well, as you said, it's just like a great visual metaphor for the audience to see how low somebody is in their life in terms of what they're doing. Because, as you said, like if you're working in a pub during the day in certain areas, it's just probably, as you said, dead, or you'd have the, one or two barflies that will be there just to sort of,
Mm.
it would always be there. But yeah, it's again, like really interesting to hear about that as well, like that as audiences seeing getting that sort of visual image and theme without sort of realizing, which I guess is, a good sign of how you guys went about with your work. What was interesting as well about the show is that there's a lot of WTF moments and there's moments of
Mm.
comedy and then drama and there's always a sense of danger. But when you're working with actors where you're trying to get the correct tone in certain scenes, how do you go about getting those performances out of the actors where you don't want it to be over the top, where when the scenes need to be call for that sort of dramaticness, but then you don't want them to be not the energy, but the sort of performance to be too flat?
I mean, I do have to say that like casting is like 90% of the job a lot of the time, especially for comedy, you know. Like I don't think you can get an actor who doesn't naturally understand comedy to be funnier. Maybe you can help them in the edit and stuff like that, but there's absolutely no, I mean, unless other directors disagree, but there's no way to kind of direct someone in a sort of outside way to kind of be funnier. Like to kind of, you know, it just should be funny. Like that's just like the worst no to give someone. So obviously with someone like Jess, because her character was very funny and like a lot of the time source of comedy, I do have to say that I didn't have to do anything, quite frankly, sometimes, and I really would only talk to her about the character and the emotion and what in relationship to Donnie, in terms of why she's saying this, why she's saying that, this was the conversation. And then she just had the funny, she just knew she was just naturally funny. With Richard, like he's also like he knows comedy timing so well. And no, I would like to say that I really brought funny out of all of them, but I think just really funny people, like Thomas Coombs, Danny Crane, like they're just hilarious actors, and so we just cast them well and sort of knew that they're gonna absolutely get that. And then all I had to do is really talk about the sort of emotional dynamic between characters, what is this person doing to this person, what is this doing to this person, and that way also like creating like a bigger or smaller sort of performance, like I try not to talk in terms of like bigger, louder, angrier, sadder. I'm sure I do that every now and then when I run out of ideas, but I always try to kind of talk about, the dynamics between the characters and emotion behind it as opposed to how it should appear outside.
Yes, I guess if you're sometimes it's kind of like they're the sort of maybe this might come off wrong, but it's like they're the sort of basic use of words that you try to use to describe certain things, but you want to enrich the scene a bit more by not just saying, yeah, you're sad here, be sad, go.
Yeah.
It's like I guess that's like a very probably easy way to describe a scene to someone, but I guess with how much is going on, and if you're shooting one scene that's in episode 3, then you're going to have somebody, their psyche is going to be further along, and so they're going to be reacting differently to what's being said and what's going on. It's like
Yeah.
I think a really good idea, a good example of that is the when Donnie and Martha
Martha.
go for, thank you, sorry, the name, it was on the tip of my tongue. They go for the coffee and then she kind of just flips out in front of everybody. And I think that's a very sort of way of like understanding somebody's psyche and knowing that it's gone from a nice, friendly person who's like kind of chit-chatting that you felt sorry for to then, oh, okay, this could be quite bad.
Yeah, I think, with this sort of stuff with Martha and with Jess, that these were the most interesting kind of moments, because obviously she just switches and she goes into this like completely different zone in her head. And I think we were almost like thinking that she's sort of channeling someone else in a way, maybe her father or someone who's almost not her, because she's so different in those moments, and she almost goes to another place. And again, I mean, Jess is just so incredible. She was just able to do that so well while performing in Scottish accent and, remembering like very long lines of dialogue and while being funny. And so she's just incredible, really.
I think that's another thing, isn't it? When somebody able to perform like that And I wonder as an actor, like what goes through your mind when you're playing out a scene, because you need to react to what's happening to your other character, but then it's like I need to make sure that I react in the accent that I'm performing in the sort of in the way
Mm.
that I'm enunciating words and all of this. Like there's so much. I wonder what's like going through their mind at those sort of scenes as well.
I think it
That's
just
like
becomes
fascinating.
part of their, yeah, I think they just become such a part of their DNA, that character. I think they kind of really live with it for a while. And I mean, I mean, I admire her so much. So it's a bit of a magic trick for me, to be honest.
Yeah, and amazing how great it's pulled off as well in the show. And I think there's a really interesting point that you said as well, where it comes down to casting and how actors can be funny or they can't be funny. There's like certain ways that they'll be delivering lines. Like you can't. There's only so much you can do in the edit to aid the comedy of the moment. But when you do have like an actor who's not so well in tuned into comedy, but they're more for the dramatic side, how do you try take that, bring that, help them bring a bit more comedic elements to their performance?
It's an interesting question. I don't know whether I can really. I mean, obviously it would be case by case basis, Some of it might be rhythm, it might be pace sometimes. I think when the line has to be delivered, if we're going into like engineering something, and if it's not, if it's like a small performance, it's just a couple lines and there's a joke there and then you're not getting it, like maybe you can suggest a pause here, pause there, maybe you just suggest something faster, but you don't actually want to do any of this because it's not very nice for an actor to kind of get. But I think that's what you would have to resort to kind of doing, trying different versions of like different scene, what kind of works. But I also feel like I love comedy is like very visual as well. And I think that's often underestimated, that certain framing, putting character in space in a certain way, kind of creating this kind of awkwardness, like awkward relationship with space, and certain editing, certain rhythm of editing, certain cuts, like this kind of musical thing. It really helps comedy as well. You could film Baby Reindeer in a very different way, and it kind of losing that humor, I think.
Yeah, and I guess there's so many different ways of how like comedy can be shown on screen in the way that somebody is quite dry with the way that they're witty, in the way that they're saying the lines, or they could be very physical. Yeah, I don't know. There's just so many. It's so different to like how somebody could be dramatic
Yeah.
and how I'm not saying like a dramatic performance is one dimensional, but there's obviously little nuances that actors could put in, but I think with like comedy, you would notice it more and you sort of react to it more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Um, yeah, but I don't think they're necessarily that different in a way. It's just like a lot of it is in the script and in the sort of the way it's filmed, but they're kind of emotionally the same often.
yeah, and I sort of want to go back to the writing as well. Sorry, 'cause something popped in my head because you're a writer yourself, and then you're coming on to a project where you're going to be the director. How does that work for yourself? Because you've written and directed your own work, but when you've taken on somebody else's work, do you have to be a lot more objective in terms of like you can't go into it with your writer's hat on, you're going in as it with your director's hat on, and go in with like a sort of clear mind of like how it's going to be directed rather than how it's written.
Yeah, I think it's, again, really, really lucky, to have a script like this, because I could have my writer's hat firmly on and have almost no notes about this script, like I think you never really get rid of those things, like it can be like, obviously, if you're not trying to take over, or like if there's no ego involved, but it's just about kind of making the best episode of television possible. I don't think there's any harm with kind of telling someone, I'm not sure if I understand this, or I don't know, can you explain this line to me? I'm not sure. Do we need this scene? Like these kind of things. And that's your storytelling together, so no one really minds that. I don't think that's part of the job. Obviously, would never like rewrite or like give extensive notes. If I have like extensive notes on the script, I just wouldn't do the show. So obviously in this case, I just loved it so much, and I admire Richard as a writer so much that yeah, as I said, I didn't have to have any of those like dilemmas. And Richard, when I did have a question or a comment, he was quite open to it.
I guess you're right. If you had a lot of notes on the script, then it would be worth doing. Just because then where do you go from building up the idea of making it? But with Richard being the writer and the star of it as well, what was that like working with him and him having so many sort of different creative hats on? And then also, did it make it easier when you're kind of on set or in pre-production just to say, oh, what do you mean by this part? Or how do you interpret it? How do you interpret this scene?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, he was like a source, like he was the sort of, he had the source material with him, and kind of we could definitely ask him anything, which was really useful for me and for actors as well sometimes. In terms of, obviously it's like such an unusual project, because what definitely gave me nightmares going into it is that I knew how special this project is for Richard. I knew how special this project is for the other people that worked on it for years. I knew that apart from it being a special project, this is based on his real life. This is something that couldn't be more personal. And obviously, I come in late to the project, and I very much understand how precious it is. At the same time, I have to have my ideas, and I have to be quite sort of, I have to know what I want to do and with it. And I think it's all about this sort of communication. And I think, thankfully, a lot of the things that I was saying, from the interview through like the usual like tone meetings and the meetings I had with Richard and the execs and stuff like that, we were very much on the same page about, the visual language of the show. So obviously that really helps, because then you sort of have that trust. You're not doing two different shows. If that was the case, obviously it would be a very different story. But obviously it's like a lot of responsibility, and I definitely had nightmares just sort of thinking, if something happens, it doesn't work, I do a terrible job, whatever, and then I have this sense that I ruined this amazing, not only this amazing piece of writing, but just like this someone's like life, so like in terms of actually directing, like stakes, like the stakes were really really high. And we sort of live in the same neighborhood as well, so I was just worried about like running to Richard and him being, you ruined my life, and and so there was definitely on my mind. But yeah, it was definitely like, a lot of conversations with Richard. But then also we did have to kind of put some boundaries down in terms of like, I think I did say, initially, if you want to co-direct with someone, then, it wouldn't be me, because I do need to like direct this. And he was okay with that. So that there was a line in terms of like me being the director and him being a writer and exec, and and so it kind of continued. But obviously we had lots of conversations, we had lots of conversations on set, and when there were sort of things with actors, Richard would chip in and talk about it, and he would see the assemblies, and he knew for how things were going, and he was definitely in the loop like any exec would be, but obviously with much higher stakes.
Yeah, I guess, well, if this is your story, it's your baby. But then there's also, if you're hiring certain people, then you're hiring them for a reason to bring that story to life. I think it's a fascinating point that you make about the co-directing part, where he's like, I wouldn't be able to do that as I need to do that myself. And I can imagine that when it was in its early stages, that maybe that was sort of idea that I had about co-directing. But I think sometimes you might need someone who's not so close to the story and script and has been there from, in Richard's case, from experiencing it, or then producers helping him make it into the theatre production and then to the Netflix show, having that sort of more of a different perspective on how to tell the story.
And I
Uh,
think Richard as well, I think he really wanted the the show to have a cinematic look and really kind of trusted me and Christoph in that sense. And I think, and also Clark and Well, they're kind of quite famous for picking sort of filmmakers who, don't do the television that looks like your normal television necessarily. Obviously Ed McDonald, who exec produced the second season of End of the Fucking World. Petra, who's runs the company now, and she's kind of quite good at kind of picking filmmakers, sometimes based on like short films, and not necessarily the kind of filmmakers that have done 20 other TV shows for BBC and worked on Casualty 10, 15 years ago. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but what I mean is, she takes risk on kind of maybe less experienced filmmakers who bring more interesting ideas. And I think there was always this idea that we want Baby Reindeer to be that kind of a show.
when you're bringing in new talent as well, as a production company, there's so many different perspectives that a director can bring and creatives bring. I think a good few years ago now, like HBO did a TV like reality show called Project Greenlight, where they were getting
I think I
basically
saw this, yeah.
yeah, and I think one of the tasks when they were making a short list of directors was that they were each, I think there's 10 directors, maybe eight, so I'm not sure. I'm sure it's between eight and 10. They're given a sort of two-page script and they need to shoot in a short film based on it, and everybody had something different. And I guess well, that's the beauty of arts is that everybody's going to interpret it in a different way. Then also how much people can play on ideas and what they can create and the certain tones that they can set from just the words on the page, and how they can make it the idea quite bleak, or they can make the idea quite fun, or they can just go in a completely different direction.
Yeah, 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 it's interesting.
I wish there was a way of like studying that, but I guess that's just it's art. It can't be like given like a scientific answer to it. It's just one of those things where everybody connects to it in a different way.
Mm.
Incredible, really. Just to hit up with my penultimate question, what was your favorite scene that you didn't direct?
Oh, ooh, interesting question. Probably the one when he comes back to Darien, actually. Oh, spoiler alert.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. There'll be a spoiler alert before this, so it's fine.
Yeah, I think that was really, really good scene, and yeah, it was very powerful. I thought what Josephine and Annika did in that scene, and what Richard and Tom did. So I think that was maybe runner up the the dad scene. I think everyone's talking about that one with the sort of confession that the dad makes. That was really moving, and yeah.
So there's some solid choices there. Asking you about the scenes that you didn't work on was probably easier to pick, but yeah, those are very sort of like strong moments in the show, especially like the dad one where in another show where there's not much acceptance, they could show it as like a moment where the dad loses respect for his son, but it's just
Mm.
played so beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they were great. The actors, and yeah, and Josephine again, and Annika.
And then just to hit with my final question, what was your favorite scene to direct?
Ooh, that's even harder somehow. Oh, ooh. Sorry, I'm making a lot of noises. You know what? I think might have been the scene when Donnie takes Martha home and gives her a tea, and he realizes that, she believes that he's her boyfriend, and he breaks up with her. I think what I loved about shooting this one is just I felt like really, throughout several takes, we really kind of got like the best version of that scene that at least I could direct. Maybe there's a better version of that scene, obviously, but I was sort of thinking, we kind of started from a decent place, but I felt like in the end we really kind of got to something quite special. I thought Richard was absolutely brilliant in that scene, and Jess just like heartbreaking. And so that's from like a performance point of view. And then maybe in terms of the fun of it, absolutely love shooting all the acting school scenes, which are the sort of montage of like silly vocal warm-ups and animal work. And I think we shot this on my birthday actually. And it's also really funny because we did this thing in the show called whip puns, which is like, it's sort of like an editing sort of trick, which helps like kind of bring a bit of dynamic to the cuts. And so what it means is like we're basically filming something for a few seconds, and then I have to cue the camera operator to whip, to like kind of whip the camera around. And that's also really fun because you almost feel like you're like conducting or something. You kind of just be like, and whip, and whip, and whip. So obviously combining with that, and the fun of like all the actors, and we had these amazing essays who were all like doing these like, one was an elephant, the other one's a giraffe, and then Shalom was like an amazing penguin who plays Keely, and Richard was, I don't actually know, he was a bird, I think. It was a bit controversial. I think it was like chicken or some kind of a bird. And it was just like, one of those days on set and you're like, oh, we can just have fun now. So I think that was like a close second. Yeah.
Again, solid choices. I think that's great that you've got the mixture of the dramatic and then also the comedic side. I think with the breakup scene, I could say air quotes breakup scene. I think it's incredible how Richard sort of plays it to that moment of like when the penny drops, and then it's like, okay, now it's like I need to get into the performance of, I need to get into this person's world, get
Yeah.
into how they feel in this, what their idea of what this is, and let them down gently.
Yeah, it was really, really amazing. I think Richard, he's a apart from, being a great writer, he's a really good actor as well.
I think as well you see the like clogs turning as an actor or even as a performance of the character to be like, I'm like it's like when Daniel goes into the lion's den and has to sort of
Yeah.
conquer it basically. And then the acting school scenes are hilarious because that's what I sometimes can imagine them being, where people have to make these weird vocal training or these sort of sounds and kind of be not necessarily like uncomfortable, but like it's just a very sort of if somebody who had no idea what they were getting into as like an audience member or how these classes work, you'd be like, what on earth is going on here? It's like this can't be real.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous for sure. I really like that line when he says, or doing anything apart from fucking acting.
Uh,
That always cracks me up. So that was really, really a lot of fun.
yeah, and it's nothing I could really add, um, except for the laughter I just added now. Um,
Thank
Veronica, thank you so much for
you
your
so
time
much.
today.
And great to speak with you.
Uh,
And take care.
Thank you very much. Baby Reindeer is streaming now on Netflix. And don't forget as well, next month in the UK, Love Lies Bleeding is out in the UK. So go watch Veronica's work there. Thank you again. You take care and bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.